So in January, Joel and I had the opportunity to get out of country for 2 weeks. Oh, wow, what a gift. Oh my goodness. I can't even tell you how many times I just said, I'm so grateful. I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful. The kids are older and they were all locked and loaded. Thank you, Stone. And it was just good. It was so good just to get out of the country for 2 weeks. We got to be in Israel, and then that's the second week we got some beach time, y'all. Just some relaxation. It was so sweet. And so when you have an opportunity like that, what do? You read. I never read. I never read. True confessions. All that read all the time, that is not my thing. But I got to read. I actually read 2 whole books, and they were both autobiographies. The first one was Matthew Perry's book, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. His autobiography, and if you don't know who Matthew Perry is, he's Chandler Bing on the sitcom Friends, and he was Chandler Bing for 10 years, and it was my favorite show. And so I wanted to read his memoir about his life, and it was good. And then the second book that I read was Prince Harry's book called Spare. Both of them, just autobiographies, just compelling, incredible stories of these men who have had just fame and fortune up one side and down the other, and I loved it. I loved sitting there reading about it, but here's what I went away with, going, wow, y'all, these 2 need Jesus. Oh my goodness. They need Jesus so much, because both men had lived and had everything. What seemed like if you were a little kid and you're like, well, what do you want when you grow up? Well, I want fame and I want fortune. I mean, Matthew Perry tells the story. He says, I found myself getting on my knees, closing my eyes tightly and praying. He said he'd never prayed before. And praying, God, you can do whatever you want for me. Just please make me famous. That's all he wanted. This was just a few weeks before he got offered the gig with Friends. Just please make me famous, because he honestly thought that being famous would fill his void, would fill that hole in his heart. And he got famous. He got real famous. He was, to my knowledge, the only other person other than Michael J. Fox that had the #1 show and the #1 movie at the time, because he had the whole 9 yards, and he had Friends, and he had it all. But he understood that wasn't filling the hole in his heart. Prince Harry, he didn't need to pray to be famous. He came into the world known by everybody. He, of course, is the second son of the late Princess Diana and now King Charles. So Prince Harry didn't have a problem with being famous, and he had everything. He had access to everything. He was royal. He was royalty. We don't even know those people. Royalty. He was actual royalty. He had everything. But in this interview that he was giving, his brother William and Kate had just had their second child, and he was doing an interview, and they were like, gosh, isn't it amazing? He's like, I'm so happy for them. But then he goes on to say, he says, I wasn't anywhere close to happy. They were just so lost and so empty. And I got done reading both of them, and I just looked at Joel, and I'm like, honestly, both of these men, all they wanted was to be known and seen and loved for who they were. Not for what they could do, not for their famous roles, not for being Chandler Bing or being the prince. They wanted to be seen, and they wanted to be known so badly to their core, and it was so obvious. And the truth is, that's us. When you wipe it all away, we just want to be seen, and we want to be known to our core. We want somebody to see us right where we're at in our actual lives, not in our pretend lives, but when we turn the lights off at night and we lay our head on our pillow, that person in our real life, actual lives, we want to be known, and we want to be seen so desperately. It's that little kid. If you have children, when they're little, think of all the times when they're like, Mom, watch. Mom, watch. Dad, watch. And they do that, and you sit on a playground, and you can just hear, Mom, watch, Mom, watch, Mom, watch. My kids did that. We have 4 of them. I got that a lot. Mom, watch. But that filter comes in as we grow up, because we don't want to be obnoxious, or we don't want to stand out, or we don't want to whatever. We don't want to appear selfish. And so we don't go, watch me. Although social media might actually disclaim a little bit of that. But that's part of it. But social media is part of that. Watch me, see me, please. Please recognize me, please admire me, please love me, please. Somebody see me, somebody please see me. And so as the church, as we come together as Harbor Church, we get this. We get that the world is hurting and that they need Jesus. We read a story like that and it's like, oh my word, you all just need the Lord in so many ways. And we get that as a church. We understand that, right? We recognize that we need to meet the needs of hurting people around us. And we're in the middle of this series called the Good Ole Days. The Good Ole Days. And so oftentimes we think of the good old days in the past. And the church has worked at meeting the needs of the hurting for centuries. For centuries and centuries. And there's been different methods of doing that. And the way that I grew up, I'm a church girl, and I have lived in the church world all my life. I got saved when I was 8 years old, and I just loved Jesus, and I just wanted to go to church. It was the weirdest thing, but I just did. I just wanted to go to church, and I understand there's different methods of bringing people in to know Jesus and to know his love. But we are here today, and we have joined churches. We've done the thing, and we're coming together, and we have got one mission, and that is to see hurting people. And if you're new here, Harbor Church has 3 things that we stand on. And that the first one is to welcome home the hurting. Second is to equip and launch the called. And the third is to make Jesus tangible. And in the middle of the series, we're going to hit on all of those because that is the good old days, and they are ahead of us. And the good old days are ahead of us because we are going to use whatever means we can to tell a hurting world that Jesus loves them. We're going to do that together. We are going to do that together because that's who we are as Harbor Church. So we're going to dive in to the scripture and see what Jesus has to say about this. We're gonna look at Matthew 9. We're gonna jump into it's the very first gospel in the New Testament. It's Matthew 9. We're gonna spend some time in there. But at this point in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is on full scale celebrity. We're jumping into the Gospel of Matthew right here, and by chapter 9, Jesus is known. Everybody's hearing about him. He's been out healing people of sickness, of leprosy. He's given a Sermon on the Mount, greatest sermon on the Mount we've got in chapters 5 and 6 and 7 of Matthew. And at the end of chapter 7, it says when Jesus had finished saying these things, talking about the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew 7:28, he says, when Jesus had finished saying all of these things, he's sitting there and he's preaching to thousands. He's preaching to thousands of them. The crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority. Jesus stood up and he taught as one who had authority, not as their teachers of the law. Jesus was completely different than any of the teachers. They were amazed at his teaching because they hadn't seen anything like it before, ever. And they were amazed by everything that Jesus had to say. And he was fully in want of these people. But here's the great thing about Jesus. Jesus was not enamored by the love of the crowds. He was always moved towards the one that was hurting. Always. Jesus would preach, he'd get up and speak to the crowds, but he was not pulled away, and he was not enamored and not in need of the love of the crowds. He was always moved towards the one that was hurting. And so we get into, so that was Matthew 7, we get into Matthew 9, and the whole entire chapter. I want to encourage you, read Matthew 9 this week. If you just need something to read in your Bible, just go to Matthew 9. And it is packed full of example after example after example of Jesus seeing the one, seeing the person that is hurting over and over again. It's packed full of stories, seeing people right where they're at in their real life, actual lives. Jesus seeing them and healing them and teaching them and giving them life. It starts off with the story of the paralytic, where the friends pick him up and they bring him to Jesus. And Jesus sees the friends, and he sees the paralyzed man. And he heals them. And he says to the friends, good job on your faith on this one. Good job on getting your friend to Jesus, on getting him to me. I see you. I see you. And story after story, later on in the chapter, he talks about Jesus seeing people with leprosy, seeing the blind man, seeing the one who can't speak, the one who cannot hear. and he heals them. And he just sees them over and over and over again. But sandwiched right in the middle of this chapter is this one verse that you can just kind of read through the whole chapter and you can kind of bounce over it and go, oh, cool. But it's this. It's Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. And it says, as Jesus went on from there, he had just healed the paralytic, the guy on the mat, couldn't walk. He just healed him up. Saw the friends, man, walk, be healed. Go on. And so from there, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector booth. Follow me, he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. So at first glance, you go, oh, that's cool. Jesus is calling his disciples, and he picked Matthew. He tagged Matthew to be one of his guys. But for whatever reason, this verse just leapt off the page at me because I'm like, Matthew. This is Matthew chapter. This is the same guy that wrote this entire gospel. This is the Matthew that wrote the Gospel of Matthew. It's him. Matthew inserted his story into this list of ways that Jesus kept seeing people. Matthew, in the third person, tells his story of how Jesus turned and saw him. He saw him. And so I was just flooded with images. And if you've seen The Chosen, the first season, they just do such an incredible job of this one. But just picture it for a moment. Matthew is sitting there, and Jesus, who by now, again, he's fully famous, fully known. Matthew knows him, and he's just sitting there in this tax collector booth, and Jesus turns to him and says, follow me. Whoa, what's washing over him? What, me? And it says that he got up, and in Luke's account of it, he says he left everything and he followed him. Matthew realized that this was his opportunity, and he makes this account and he speaks about it, again, in the third person, but he saw Jesus looking at him and he's like, I want everything that man has to offer, and I will leave everything to follow him. And he does. And he gets up and he goes because of the power that Jesus had, of the love that Jesus had, of the compassion that Jesus had, of the power that Jesus had, and the life that Jesus had to offer Matthew. It was too good to stay there. He's like, I am in for life. And he left everything. But here's what's interesting is who Matthew was. Who Matthew was a tax collector. And tax collectors, honestly, they were hated in this culture. They were hated. They were despised. They were set up by Roman officials to take money from the Jews. And so Matthew, who was Jewish, his job was to take money from his fellow Jews and to give it to the Romans. And they hated him because they felt like he was a traitor. He sold out. He was the lowest of low. They would compare him with thieves and murderers. He was awful. And so imagine him sitting there before Jesus comes by, and he's just sitting there in his booth, doing his thing, being hated, being ostracized. He didn't fit in with the Romans because he wasn't Roman. He didn't fit in with the Jewish people because he just took from them, and they hated him. And so he would have felt so isolated and alone, and he would have been hurting because there's nowhere he fit in. There's nowhere he fit in. And then all of a sudden, Jesus shows up and sees him and says, come follow me. And Matthew is like, what in the world are we talking about here? Because Matthew had no hope to become righteous. Matthew had no hope to become righteous at all. There was nobody that was going to accept him. The scribes and the Pharisees, if they had gone to him, it's like, okay, what do I need to do? Well, the Pharisees would say, well, clean up your life. Get your act together, stop doing this, go do something productive, and then maybe you'll be good enough. But Jesus didn't do that. Jesus just said, come follow me. Come follow me. Come follow me. And so what happens next? In Matthew 9, verse 10, he says, this is so awesome. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. In Luke's account of it, it says that Matthew held a great banquet for Jesus. He was so amazed by what Jesus had done for him that he would meet him in his real life, actual life, and ask him to come follow him and change everything for him, that he threw a party for him and invited his friends, because who would his friends have been? It wasn't the Romans. It wasn't the Jewish people. It wasn't the Pharisees. No, it was other filthy, horrible, hated tax collectors and sinners. And he invited him in to go, what if he could do the same thing for you? Come and see, come and see, come and see, come and see what Jesus has done for me. If he has the power to do that in my life, look what he can do. This isn't some buddy Jesus going, hey, I'm just going to go drink and party with the other tax collectors there. No. This is Jesus being invited into his table and his friends coming in to see, maybe he can do the same thing for me. Maybe he can do the same thing for me. Think about your dining room table. Think about the intimacy of when you've got people around your dining room table. Think about how protective you are of that table. Not everybody gets to come and sit at that. It is chosen people, and that's what Matthew did. He brought in Jesus, and he brought in friends who are just the sinners that he was. And so what happens, of course, what happens here in verse 11, chapter 9, when the Pharisees saw this, they're walking by. Who knows how it actually all went down? Nobody actually knows how it all went down, but somehow the Pharisees got wind of it. Either they saw it or they recognized it. So when the Pharisees saw this, in verse 11, they asked Jesus' disciples, why in the world does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Can you not just hear the smugness in their voice? Why in the world is he hanging out with them? Why is your teacher hanging out with them? I love Jesus' response on hearing this, because Jesus heard it, because he's all things. Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Now go and learn what this means. I love it. He kind of throws it down. And then he throws out a passage from Hosea. He says, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Jesus was all about seeing the one that was hurting. Jesus was all about it. He cared so much for Matthew, because Matthew was hurting. He cared so much for his friends, and he wanted them to know the good news that he was Lord and could be their Savior, and he was their Messiah. He could be everything to them, and it was such good news that they flocked to see him, because Jesus was all about seeing the one that was hurting. So what does this mean for us as Harbor Church? What does that mean for us as a collective body? It's a great example. Lovely, great. So what does that mean for us as a church? And again, Jesus sets the example over and over again in Matthew 9, and he wraps up the entire chapter with what he would speak to us if he walked in today. He would say, it's Matthew 9, 35 through 38, and it says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages. Having been there, imagining Jesus walking through all these towns and villages around the Sea of Galilee. He would teach in their synagogues. He would proclaim the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. And when he saw the crowds, again, he would go into these towns and there would be crowds everywhere, and he would see these people. What does it say there? He had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, just picture him standing there as he's looking out on these people and feeling so much compassion for them. And he says to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field, because Jesus wants us to do the same as him and to see the hurting around us. To see the hurting around us. We have got to do that as Harbor Church. That word harbor was such an intentional name that was selected, that we chose when we first began this whole thing, when God birthed this church. That word harbor. You picture a harbor, picture a bay, picturing a ship coming off of the storms and coming into that safe place. Maybe it's taken on some stuff. Maybe it needs to come in because it's just in need. And that is us. Sometimes we just need a safe place to go. And that is the place that we need to be, the safest place for somebody to come into off the storms of life, to do that. And it is a message that has been at the core of who we are since the very beginning. But as is always the case, it's never one and done. God needs to keep reminding us, and he's been reminding me so much of this in my own life. When we had that second week of being on a beach, just being chill. So one morning, I got up early with the sun, and Joel had taken a run, of course. Joel took a run, I did not. But I kind of put in my earbuds, whatever they're called. And I was just walking along the beach, and I was enamored with pelicans. They had a ton of pelicans, and they just fly in formation. I'd never seen that before. And so I'm standing there on the beach, and the pelicans are just flying around in formation. The waves are coming in. And I'm thinking a lot, honestly, about madness. The Madness of Motherhood, March 11th. Y'all need to sign up. I'm standing there, and I'm thinking so much about it. Because seriously, Christmas madness. I'm not joking. It's one of my favorite days of the year. And so I'm standing there on the beach, and it's just one of those things like, God, I long for those times to just relax and just be open and just hear from you, God. God, what would you say to me? What would you speak into my life about madness, about that ministry? What would you speak into my life about my family? What would you say to me as we're doing ministry, as we're doing church, about my marriage and my kids and my parenting and my job and all of it? What would you say to me right now, God? And you're just kind of waiting for like this huge, wonderful word from God. Oh, this is what I'm going to do, Julie. This is what I'm going to do. And here we go. Lay it out, ABC. It's going to be good. And I'm just standing there. I'm just waiting. And I notice all of a sudden above me is this bird just kind of flying from here. And I hadn't noticed it before. And this bird kind of comes over and kind of draws my attention. Then that bird goes this way, but draws my attention to it's about from me to the edge of the stage. Is this one lone bird. And all I could sense in me is, see the one, wherever you are at. See the one. When you are planning out madness, when we are praying for women who need to be there because they're so hurting, because moms are hurting, and they need to know the love of Jesus, see that one that walks in the door. When you are at Harbor Church, see that one. Because here's how this all breaks down to us. We can say it, and it could be a really good slogan for us as Harbor Church. We're going to welcome home the hurting. That's awesome, and it sounds wonderful, and yes, we all want to be about that. But in order for us to do that collectively, we have to do that individually. We have to make that truth so true in our own lives. We have to make it true in our own lives. So how do we do that? How do we do that? And the first one is this: ask God to give you eyes to see. Ask God to give you eyes to see the actual people in your actual lives. Not the people that you keep hoping to maybe one day have in your lives. No, today, who are the actual people in your actual lives? So for me individually, that's my husband. To see him in our actual lives. My children, for where they're at in their actual lives, to see them where they are at. To see them. I don't have this verse up on the screen, but Ephesians 1:18, Paul prays, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened. The eyes of your heart would be enlightened so that you would know the hope of your calling. We each have, if we have decided to put Jesus in the driver's seat of our lives, we have a calling in our lives to love other people, love God, love others. That is our calling, and that is not up for negotiation. Pray that the eyes of your heart would be enlightened, that you would know the hope of your calling, that we would do that individually. Who are the people in your lives? Your actual lives. Who are the people in your lives that maybe they're hurting, that you can stop long enough to see them and come alongside them and speak truth and love and compassion into their lives? Who are those people? And then as we begin to do that individually, then we begin to do that collectively as a church. And so many of you are so good at this. So many of you are so good at this. I don't know if she's in here, but Autumn May, that girl. So several months ago, I was coming into church, and again, I'm a church girl, and I love coming to church, but there on a very rare Sunday, There are Sundays where I will come in and I'm like, I just want to hide in the back. I don't know if I even want to be here. True confession. Doesn't happen very often because this is my place and y'all are my people. But there are moments, there are some Sundays where I'm like, I am hurting and I don't even know if, all those lies. When you walk into a building, I don't think anybody likes me. I don't think anybody cares. I don't think anybody wants to know me. And I don't even know if I want to care about any of them. I mean, we do that because we're human. And so am I. And I was just having one of those mornings. And I was just feeling kind of sorry for myself. And it was just, blah. I just felt that. And I was walking in. And sweet Autumn, she literally just comes up to me. And she just gets right in front of me. And she just looks in my eyes and says, hi. How are you? And she just gives me this hug. And for whatever reason, you see me. And she had no idea. And then she went on to her thing. But that filled me up so much. And it changed everything because somebody saw me. And we all need that. I think about this week. Pastor Paul and his wife, Jamie. Jamie found out that my week was bananas. We'll get into that in a second. My week was bananas. Jamie texted me, hey, I know you had a crazy night. Can I just bring over a pot of chili for your family? 100%, because I don't have meal planning going on in my life, so absolutely, you can bring over a pot of chili. So she shows up that night with a big old crock pot full of chili, cornbread, chocolate chip cookies, honey butter. Oh my gosh. Applesauce, crackers, the whole thing. Because she saw me. And don't we all need that? And that's what we do in the body of Christ. When we begin to do that individually, that's because Jamie and Autumn both do that individually in their own lives. And because they do that, that influences the body, us collectively, doesn't it? So number one, ask God to give you eyes to see the people around you. And then love them. The second thing we can do is allow God to call an audible. Allow God to call an audible. Because Jesus did this all the time. Jesus was fully interruptible. I don't even know if that's a word. Jesus allowed himself to be interruptible. In that same passage, again, Matthew 9, y'all read it this week. Jesus allowed himself to be interrupted. He had a guy who was a bigwig. His daughter was hurting. His daughter was dying. Jesus, can you come? Help my daughter. She's dying. And so he's on his way. And then from somewhere out of nowhere, this woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years reaches out and just touches the hem of his garment. And he realizes that power had gone out of him. And he's like, hold on. I know we're going somewhere, but I gotta turn around. I gotta see this woman. And he turns around and he calls her daughter. And he heals her right there and then. Because Jesus was interruptible. And he asks us to be interruptible. And that can be a hard thing. Because in my own life, as I work so hard to see my children in our home and to serve them, because we know that time is short, right, Mama? I've got 2 seniors. So I'm gonna be there, man. I'm gonna be there for all of it. I'm taking in all the basketball games. We had 3 this week. I'm taking them all in. Bella's got friends, girlfriends. She's coming in with all these girls who are just coming in our homes. And man, I wanna be there for it. I wanna see these kids where they're at, because I know these kids' story and they're hurting. And I wanna be there for it. So of course, it's varsity basketball season. And so the opportunity was, can you sign up and host the varsity team at your home one night? Of course. Oh my gosh, I love watching my son play basketball. And so I signed up for this last Wednesday night. It was my night, and I had nachos ready to go, man. We were gonna have prepare your own nachos, tacos. We had the whole thing. I had the meat, had all of it ready to go. And there was about 14, 15, 20, I don't know. A bunch of kids were coming to my house Wednesday night. About 3:30, I had to take my mom to a doctor's appointment. And at that doctor's appointment, they told me that she needed to be immediately taken to the ER because of some health things that she was going through. So we're wheeling her down to the ER, and it's getting close to 5 o'clock. And I'm like, I am not going to be able to be home for this. So my daughter, being the rock star that she is, she's calling me up. She's like, Mom, I have got this. And if you know Bella, you know she got this. She absolutely had it. She's like, Mom, I got it. We went through all the different things. I got it. Zion got home early from practice. He got everything. They had the whole thing set up. And before I even knew it, the kids had already been and gone. And they ate wonderfully. And they were fine. But I sat there in that ER. I sat in the hospital room. And I thought to myself, you know what? She's my one. My mom is my one right now. Because God called an audible. And I couldn't be there. And here's what's true, you guys. I'm not some noble, wonderful person that just thinks all the great thoughts all the time. On the drive home, by the time we got home, she's fine. She's fine. Everything is fine. We drove home at about 11 o'clock that night. I'm so tired. I'm like, okay. Oh man, Mom, you're my one. You're my one. But by the time I got home and I got finally in my bed, I was so dang tired and I had no filter and I just bawled. I'm like, man, I really wanted to be here tonight for all those kids. But also knowing that God called an audible, and that's okay. And he can do that in our lives. We want to see the people, but leave space to know that God can call an audible in our lives when it comes to seeing the people in our actual lives and seeing the hurting in our lives. Are we open to that? Church, as we walk into this next season, are we willing to do that on an individual basis so that we can then collectively do that? Because, guys, what if God keeps bringing people in? What if God keeps bringing you hurting people? What if he does that for us? Are we going to see them and point them towards the gospel? I'm going to ask the band to come on up. As we wrap this up this morning, I recognize that there's kind of two different groups that are maybe hearing this story. One is, man, you're in it. I want to love every single person that walks through that door. I want to love my families. I want to love my coworkers. I want to do this and I want to do it well. But maybe you walk in this morning and you're the Matthew. You're the one that's hurting. Maybe you just need to know that you are seen and you are loved. Because the truth is, the scribes and the Pharisees that were standing outside, watching all of them and judging them, going, who does Jesus think he is, sitting with them? They needed Jesus just as much as they did. Because as Joel says, holy, righteous God, everyone else. We're all in that boat. We all need him. And maybe this morning you walk in and you go, I just want somebody to see me. I want to be known. Would you stand? Would you stand? Jesus welcomes home the hurting. And we're going to do the same. Love God and love others. It's non-negotiable. And so this morning, I want to just open up a time to go, if you are hurting, Jesus sees you. And it's not a story, it's not a fairy tale. It is life and death. And what if this morning you said, God, I'm going to accept it. Maybe you've been pushing back on it for a long time. Maybe there's someone in here who has just been pushing back and knowing that God has been drawing you and saying, follow me because I have everything that will give you peace and hope and forgiveness and life. But Jesus, you don't know where I've been. I've been like this tax collector sinner thing. I don't know that you could even use me. I don't fit in any group. And Jesus says, follow me because I have loved you. My love never fails, ever. Would you pray? Would you bow your heads? Holy Spirit, would you work in us to know that you are the way and the truth and the life, that you offer hope, that you offer love. And if you are in the sound of my voice, whether you're online, whether you're in the room, would you just speak out to him, God, I need you because I am the one that is hurting. Jesus, I believe that you see me and that you love me and that you know me. And I'm going to open up myself to your love. During this next song, as Jordan sings, as they lead, would you speak out your heart to God? Whatever that may be for you this morning. Jesus welcomes home the hurting. And if that is you, Jesus welcomes you home this morning. In Harbor Church, we are going to do the same as him.